Chapter 2. Rashid drove Gail to her apartment so she could pack. While waiting, he checked out the contents of her refrigerator. There wasn't much inside, some fruit and a few containers of yogurt. He knew it wasn't from lack of money. Gail worked because she chose to do so, not because she needed the income. It was something to do with the time on her hands. Jason, while not as financially well off as he, had nevertheless been quite comfortable and had made ample provision for his family in the event of his demise. Gail had benefited from 2 separate life insurance policies, the proceeds from the house she'd sold and Jason's business, which she'd also put on the market. No, she didn't lack for cash. There was no food in the house because she hadn't been able to keep anything down. This pregnancy was affecting Gail's appetite, which, in his opinion, had never been healthy to begin with. Rashid could see he was going to have to keep a closer eye on her. He had assumed, since she had been through this before, that she could handle things on her own with minimal assistance from him, other than the financial kind. After his talk with Dr. Hagen, he could see he'd been mistaken. He would have to speak to Crystal to make sure she understood how vital it was they gave to Gail all the emotional support she needed. Though Gail was her friend, Crystal's mind was focused on the end result, not the process necessary to achieve it. His wife had tunnel vision when she wanted something, and he didn't believe she'd allowed herself to consider or even realize the magnitude of the sacrifice required of Gail to provide them with a child, when she herself was gaining nothing but potential heartache from the deal. He looked up as Gail walked out of her room, wheeling her suitcase behind her. From the size of it, she hadn't packed much, but then you didn't need a lot of clothes when you were supposed to be resting. "We need to go by the office and pick up my car," she said distractedly. From the motion of her hands, she was mentally tallying the things she'd packed to make sure she had everything. "That won't be necessary. I will drive you to the house." At his words, her attention focused completely on him, as her eyes examined him with laser-like sharpness. "I need to go by the office and pick up my car," she slowly repeated. "You can take me or I can catch a cab. Either way, I'm not leaving my car at the office." Rashid opened his mouth, then stopped, catching his words before they escaped. He had to be careful. This woman was not his wife. He had no authority over her in any capacity, even though she carried his child. Crystal would have never questioned his decision, but then Gail wasn't Crystal. He nodded. "As you wish." She studied him for a moment more, before digging into her purse for her keys. Once she had them in hand, she headed for the door, only to stop suddenly and turn back. "I need to forward my calls to my cell phone." Task completed, she readied herself to exit, only to stop as another item popped into her mind. Rashid didn't rush her. He knew this was difficult for her. Her home was her sanctuary, and they were forcing her to leave it on such short notice. Finally, she was ready. He took the suitcase from her and escorted her down to his car. A short while later, she was pulling out of her employer's parking lot with him following close behind. He pulled out his cell phone as it rang. A quick glance at the caller ID revealed it was Crystal. "We'll be there shortly. She wanted to stop and collect her car," he answered, knowing what her question was going to be before she asked. "Oh, I was wondering what was taking so long. That's good. Gail would hate being here without any transportation. She's very independent." "So I'm beginning to see. The only reason she agreed to stay with us is because the doctor threatened to keep her in the hospital," he stated with a grimace. "I can't wait until she gets here. This is going to be so much fun." Rashid frowned. His wife acted as though this were some teenage sleepover. "Sweetling, she's under doctor's orders to stay in bed," he reminded. "Rashid, Gail isn't sick. She just needs to eat. I know her. She won't be able to stay in bed all day. I'll make sure she gets plenty of rest, and we'll still have fun. You'll see." Rashid didn't comment. He wasn't pleased with his wife's attitude. Having miscarried several times herself, he thought she'd be more conscious of the risks. At his continued silence, Crystal said, "Honey, trust me. I want this baby as much as you. I won't let her overdo it. But she won't be happy if we treat her like an invalid. Gail is not me. She's strong. She knows her body and its limitations. Everything will be fine. I'll see you when you get home." "All right." He disconnected the call, still deeply disturbed. He'd have to monitor the situation closely. His only consolation was that Crystal's work as an interior decorator sometimes required her putting in long hours. She would be gone for much of the day, giving Gail an opportunity to rest, and he would be home at night to ensure she didn't overdo it. This baby was too important for them to take chances with its well-being. Gail drove towards Crystal and Rashid's home, wondering how much this was going to emotionally cost her. She was pregnant with her best friend's child and would now be living in their home for the next 2 weeks. This whole situation was wrong any way you looked at it. Because of this pregnancy, she was being dragged deeper and deeper into their lives. Somehow she'd thought she would become pregnant, she and Crystal would hang out as they'd always done, and in 9 months she'd hand over a bouncing baby to the happy parents. That would be the end of it. It's the impression she'd gained from the material she'd read on surrogates. Of course, in none of those cases did the surrogate happen to be best friends with the couple. Still, she thought their friendship would make things easier for her. It wasn't. She hadn't been prepared for the emotional toll this pregnancy was taking. Memories of her pregnancy with Marcus and the way Jason had pampered her rose when least expected. Add those sad but wonderful memories to the hormonal fluctuations she experienced, and Gail frequently found herself in the midst of crying jags and a grief-stricken depression, the likes of which she hadn't experienced since the early days of her loss. In addition, in all the time she'd known Crystal, the two of them had never actually spent time living under the same roof. Somehow, Gail had instinctively known if they had ever tried to cohabitate, their friendship wouldn't survive. Now their relationship was going to be put to the test, and at the worst possible time. Maybe she was being silly, seeing problems where there weren't any. Still, she couldn't help thinking about the cardinal rules her mom had taught her about girlfriends and relationships. 1. You never vented or complained about your man to your friends while you were angry with him, because when you calmed down, they were still upset with him on your behalf. Make too many complaints and they would take an act of disliking to him and become vocal in their encouragement for you to end the relationship. 2. You never bragged about your man, because some heifer you thought was your friend would see the good thing you have and try to steal him from you. 3rd and final, you never ever allowed any of your single, non-committed friends to live under the same roof with you and your man, or spend a lot of time with the two of you. Some women could be trusted, but most couldn't. No sense asking for trouble. It was true while Jason lived, the two couples had spent a lot of time together. Now that he was gone, Gail spent most of her time with just Crystal, never forgetting her friend had a husband and responsibilities. Rarely were the three of them together like the other night at her apartment. Gail cleared her mind of gloomy thoughts as she pulled into the circular drive in front of Crystal's home. She was here now. Her only alternative was to remain at the hospital, and she couldn't see herself doing that. Gail pasted a smile on her face as she exited the car. Crystal came rushing out of the door and down the steps, a big welcoming grin on her face. I hate to say I told you so, but I did. I told you if you didn't start eating, the doctor was going to sick Rashid on you. Yes, you did. Looks like I'm your patient for the next 2 weeks. Her friend planted her hands on her hips, an annoyed look on her face. Patient? You're not a patient. Get a little food in you, a little rest, and you'll be good as new. In the meantime, we can have lots of fun starting right now. I hope you brought your swimsuit with you because today's a perfect day to lounge by the pool. Miguel will take your bags to your room and Carmelita's preparing lunch. Go get changed and I'll meet you on the patio in 15 minutes. You're in the main guest suite. Gail heaved a silent sigh of relief. The room she referred to doubled as a cabana and had its own separate entrance off the patio. It was loosely connected to the house by the kitchen and was a good distance from the master bedroom. She would be close enough to be considered under their roof and keep Rashid and Dr. Hagen happy, but not so close she intruded on her friend's privacy. She followed Miguel to her room and unpacked her bathing suit, a modest one-piece. With the heat index in the high 80s, today was the perfect day to lie by the pool. Maybe being off work for the next 2 weeks wouldn't be too bad. She could sure use the rest. During this stage of her pregnancy, she got sleepy at the oddest moments. Gail grabbed a towel, opened the door, and walked out to the poolside. Carmelita was already there setting up lunch. Looks good, Carmelita, as always. Gail stooped down to give the much shorter housekeeper/cook a kiss on the cheek. Carmelita smiled her appreciation. We're going to take good care of you, Miss Gail. You and the niño. Feed you lots of food. Miss Crystal, she say she hired this nutritionist, but I tell her, Miss Gail just needs some of my cooking, and she be fine. Gail sat at the table and allowed Carmelita to serve her, knowing she needed to eat. However, her stomach already rebelled at the thought of food. In front of her, Carmelita set a glass of tea. You drink these first. It will settle your stomach. Then you nibble on the food I give you. See? Okay, Carmelita. You're the boss. Gail picked up the tea and took a small sip. The soothing taste of peppermint filled her mouth. It's peppermint. Carmelita nodded. See, peppermint with honey. Very good for the stomach. Calms it so you can eat. Thank you. I'm feeling better already. She smiled broadly. Remember, nibble and sip. When you've had enough, stop and El Niño will be satisfied. Yes, ma'am, Gail saluted her, laughing when Carmelita popped her with her apron before returning to the kitchen. Looking at the spread before her, Gail decided to start with fruit. The cantaloupe looked very appealing to her today. She forked a piece and put it on her plate. As she bit into it, she almost moaned in pleasure as the sweet juices flooded her mouth and rolled down her cheek. Disregarding the other items on the table, she attacked the melon, gorging herself piece by piece until it was all gone. It was only as she laid the last rind on her plate that she became aware of Rashid's presence. Gail flushed uncomfortably as she wiped her hands and mouth, uncomfortably aware of the picture she must make. How long have you been standing there? Long enough to know we must be sure to keep a supply of melons on hand for your enjoyment. I've never seen anyone eat their food with such gusto, Rashid said, with a gleam of amusement in his eyes as he came closer and seated himself at the table. Whatever reply Gail would have made was lost as Crystal breezed onto the patio, her body barely covered in a skimpy red bikini, the white cover-up flapping behind her. Oh, good, she called out gaily. Food's already on the table. She ran her hand along Rashid's shoulders as she passed him and took a seat next to him. While she filled her plate with salad, Crystal kept up a steady stream of chatter, regaling Gail and Rashid with tales of the client's home she was currently decorating, and designer horror stories of clients she'd served in the past. Lunch passed swiftly, and soon Crystal and Gail were lounging by the pool, relaxing in the ocean breeze. Rashid had returned to the office. There was a lull in the conversation. Then Crystal turned to Gail, looking as serious as Gail had ever seen her. I really appreciate you doing this for me. I know this is taking more effort than you thought it would. I can't thank you enough. You're welcome. What are friends for? Yes, it's harder than I thought it would be. I wasn't sick like this with Marcus. I just breezed through that pregnancy. I thought this one would be the same. Gail ignored the now familiar pang at the thought of the child she'd lost. Well, whatever the case, you're strong. Stronger than I am. You can handle it. We just need to find food you can keep down, Crystal said encouragingly. Crystal, you're not weak. It's not your fault you've miscarried. Please don't blame yourself. You know doctors don't know everything. Just because they can't determine the source of the problem doesn't mean that it's you. My head knows that, but my heart says otherwise. Do you know one of the specialists I went to actually suggested the problem was that Rashid and I were incompatible? That something about our combined chemistry was the reason I couldn't carry a baby to full term? Gail scowled. I've never heard of that, unless he was talking about the Rh factor stuff. You know, where the mother has a positive blood type and the babies are negative? I've heard it can cause miscarriages if the doctor doesn't catch it in time. I don't think that's what he was talking about. Anyway, it doesn't matter. You know, after the last miscarriage, Rashid put his foot down. No more pregnancies for me. I failed him, Crystal stated dejectedly. Her eyes shimmered with the glint of tears. Gail turned fully on her lounger to face Crystal. You did not fail him. How can you say that? It's obvious to anyone with eyes that Rashid loves you for more than your ability to give him a child. Why do you keep putting yourself down like this? Like you're somehow less of a woman because you haven't been able to carry a child to term. Having a baby is not what makes you a woman. You've got a good man who loves you, a wonderful home, a great marriage, and the job of your dreams. Most of all, you're a wonderful person. Your womanhood is not defined by your ability to procreate. You need to get that out of your head. What does your counselor say? Because of her depression, Crystal's doctor had recommended counseling to help her adjust to all of the loss she'd faced. I don't know, I stopped going. He was a quack. How is a man going to understand my desire to have a child? Crystal asked scornfully. Gail shrugged one shoulder, hating to see her friend like this. Maybe he couldn't, but why don't you find another counselor? A woman, or maybe a support group of women who do understand because they're going through the same thing? The last thing I want to do is be with a bunch of loser women crying into their cups about not being able to have children. I'm fine. You're absolutely right. I have a lot to be grateful for, and I'm not going to let this one little failing become more important to me than all the good in my life. Rashid is a good man, a great husband, and I'm an awesome interior decorator. Soon I'll be a wonderful mommy, thanks to my generous friend, she told Gail with a smile. Gail returned Crystal's smile, but inside, she was concerned. She really wished Crystal would seek out a support group. Crystal wasn't adjusting as well as she thought she was, but Gail kept her fears to herself. She couldn't make Crystal get the help she so obviously needed. All she could do is continue to be there for her. The 2 weeks passed by swiftly, and before Gail knew it, it was time to return to the doctor. Crystal had an important meeting with her client, so Rashid accompanied her. Dr. Hagen wasn't doing a full pelvic exam on this visit. This one was just to determine if she was to be allowed off bed rest and could return to work. It felt strange sitting in the waiting room with Rashid. She noticed some of the other women in the waiting room sliding envious glances her way. Gail wanted to announce, "He's not mine, I'm just a friend," but didn't, because really it wasn't any of their business. Still, she supposed she could understand their envy. Rashid was an attractive man, and an extremely courteous one as well. He carried his power and wealth around him like an aura. You just knew he was someone important as soon as he stepped into the room. They called her name at the door, and Rashid clasped her elbow to help her to stand before escorting her to the back. He stood by her side while her vitals were taken, then followed as she was directed by the nurse, not to the office as she expected, but to an examination room. "Excuse me, I thought this was just a follow-up from the hospital?" Gail was uncomfortably aware of Rashid's presence. There was no way she was undressing with him around. The nurse smiled reassuringly. "It is. Dr. Hagen wants to check the baby's heartbeat. You don't have to disrobe. Just sit on the table and he'll be in shortly." Gail nodded in agreement, glad she'd worn loose-fitting trousers and a top, rather than the dress she'd started to wear. When Rashid had requested to come with her, she hadn't given any thought to how much intimacy they would be forced into with his presence. A few minutes later, Dr. Hagen breezed into the office. "How's my favorite patient today?" Gail rolled her eyes. "I'm good. I'm eating. Can I go home now?" He clucked his tongue at her. "Answer a few questions for me first, then I'll answer yours." A few questions turned into a barrage, some of which were directed to her, others aimed at Rashid. She was amazed at the accuracy of the answers Rashid gave. Even the questions directed to her, he answered when she hesitated. Rashid had to have been monitoring her very closely to know these things. She wasn't sure how she felt about that. "Gail, lay back. I want to listen to the baby. Rashid, would you like to hear your child?" "Yes," he answered, his posture showing just how interested he was as he watched the proceedings. The nurse pushed the waistband of Gail's pants down below her still flat stomach and tucked a towel in them, overlapping the outside to protect the material. Then she lifted her shirt until it gathered under her breast, out of the way of the warm gel the doctor squeezed onto her belly. Dr. Hagen placed the monitor on her stomach and rolled it around. The strong, rhythmic beat of the baby's heartbeat filled the room. Overcome by emotion, Rashid reached out and gripped Gail's hand tightly. "Nice, strong heartbeat. The baby is fine. Now for its mama," Dr. Hagen said as he put the monitor away. The nurse wiped her stomach clean and readjusted her clothing. When she stepped out of the way, Rashid helped Gail to sit up. "So, what's the verdict? Can I come off bed rest? Is it all right for me to return to work?" she asked anxiously. Rashid stood by her side, saying nothing while they waited for the doctor to answer. Dr. Hagen took a seat and motioned for Rashid to do the same. Once he was seated, Dr. Hagen directed his attention to Gail. I know you want to return to work, but I'm still concerned about your weight. You've lost too much. In the last 2 weeks, you've gained a pound, which is good, but since you've been pregnant, you've lost 20, far more than is safe for you to lose and be healthy. I'm keeping you on bed rest until you gain at least 5 more pounds. I'd really like to see you gain 10. He waited expectantly. Gail's response wasn't long in coming. But I can go home, right? I want to go home. I want to be in my own apartment, in my own bed. I can stay off work another couple of weeks. That's no problem. Just let me go home. Dr. Hagen shared a look with Rashid before answering. I think it would be better if you remain in the Jabbar's home, at least until your next visit. You're already showing signs of improvement, just in the short time you've been there. When Gail opened her mouth to argue, he said firmly, Doctor's orders. You live alone. At home, you would be tempted to overdo. At least with Rashid, I know you're being properly cared for. Dr. Hagen paused, allowing Gail the opportunity to respond. When she remained quiet, he continued. You're scheduled to come back and see me in 4 weeks. We'll reevaluate the situation at that time. When she still had no response, Rashid stood. Thank you, Dr. Hagen. I'll make sure that Gail is taken care of. We'll see you in 4 weeks. Rashid shook Dr. Hagen's hand. See the receptionist on your way out, he said, and left the room. As soon as the door closed, Rashid turned to Gail and watched her. When the silence became too much, she glared at him and snapped, What? Is it such a trial, living in our home? He asked quietly. Gail took a deep breath and turned her face away until she could compose herself. His calmness made her feel like an unreasonable shrew. Rashid, I get that this is your child and you have a vested interest in its development, but your child is in my body and my body wants to be in its own home, surrounded by its own things, sleeping in its own bed, she finished softly. Come. Rashid held his hand out to her. This is better discussed somewhere else. I'm sure they have need of this room. She didn't want his assistance getting off the exam table, but to refuse would be churlish. Gail took his hand and allowed Rashid to help her down. She waited while he opened the back door for her and then walked through, very aware of his presence at her back. After a quick stop by the receptionist desk, they headed out the door. A few minutes later, Gail watched as Rashid crossed in front of the Mercedes after seating her inside. He slid smoothly into the car and started the engine. Where would you like to eat? We can talk over lunch. It doesn't matter to me. She closed her eyes and leaned her head against the headrest. We'll go to my club, he said decisively as he spun out of the parking garage. It's not too far from here, and we can speak privately. Fine, Gail answered, and remained quiet for the rest of the drive. She was bitterly disappointed. The only way she'd been able to manage being away from home was by telling herself it was only for 2 weeks. She could handle 2 weeks. 2 weeks was a vacation, something she hadn't had in a long time. Now Dr. Hagen was talking another month. A month of her living in someone else's home, away from familiar surroundings and familiar things like the pictures of her family. Gail couldn't do it. She wouldn't do it. It was too much to ask of anyone.